Mr. Nealon, what I guess I've read in your article is that you would attribute Thomas's statement to a later edition of someone who, because of the attacks on Christianity, added to the Gospel of John and thought that that would help out in terms of the so-called ghost stories. And therefore, you have said that it is reasonable to believe that at a later time, you can tell me what you think is a later time, and what is the evidence for the fact of assuming that that particular account is an add-on? How do you know that?
Well, as I say again, I do not know that. I was not there. But to go back to what Dr. Montgomery was saying, obviously you can find scholars, hundreds of scholars, who will agree with any particular point of view. I mean, there's a scholar, which I'm sure you're familiar with, who says that Jesus never existed. Now, I think that's ridiculous, but he's a scholar, a PhD, and he says that. But it is true that there is a scholarly, a mainstream opinion about the dating of the books. And you quote that mainstream opinion in your book, History and Christianity, page 34. And although later on you have a caveat that there are other scholars who put the documents older, or younger, depending on how you want to look at it, that the documents do date, as I argue, with John coming no later than 100. And
oh heavens, I have no problem at all with saying that Mark was the earliest gospel and John was the latest. But that's not the point. The point is that the burden of proof rests upon you to show, number one, that John must be so late that when the account of Thomas is given, that account is unreliable. Now, the fact of the matter is that even if John is the latest of the Gospels, there's no difficulty at all in showing that it came from an eyewitness of the events, because we have external evidence of this. We have Papias, who was a disciple of John, and we have Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, both stating that John was in fact the author of that Gospel. So we have an eyewitness saying that one of the original disciples had tactile, physical contact with the resurrected Christ. I think you've got a real problem there. You can't just get rid of that as some kind of later addition or textual variant produced by drunken monks in the Middle Ages.
Well, I think you have a real problem because what you're doing is you're quoting scholars who are in the minority. If you look...
Oh, excuse me, but I was quoting primary sources, Papias and
But it's
Polycarp.
not that simple, because you have to look at the primary sources and what they said and what they really knew and what other people say. And all I can say is that, for example, I have just looked at the Encyclopedia Britannica to see what it says.
That's not a primary source. Frankly, it was not being distributed in the first century.
I'm aware of that. But it is the standard English language encyclopedia, which attempts to summarize the knowledge of the Western world. And you can go to Encyclopedia Britannica, Harper's Bible Dictionary, the Oxford Annotated Bible, and they say that it is doubtful that John wrote John. Now, obviously, you can quote scholars who think that John did write John.